This is a re-recording of the presentation which I made at the Pigs Peak RTD17 conference on responsible tourism in destinations. The focus was on local economic development in Eswatini. It was a national workshop held at Pigs Peak Hotel, sponsored by the ICRT Southern Africa group. The focus of the presentation was on why creating shared value through tourism benefits both businesses and communities. And it starts from the premise that using tourism to make better places to live in is how we make tourism better, because great places to live are great places to visit. The acid test is to put making better places for people to live in before making better places for people to visit, because the one will lead to the other. A great place to live is a great place to visit. So the 2002 Cape Town Declaration was developed at an official side event to the World Summit on Sustainable Development held in Johannesburg in 2002. 2 decades on, we revised the Cape Town Declaration based on 2 decades of experience of implementing responsible tourism. You can find an easy link to the Cape Town Declaration and to the 2022 Responsible Tourism Charter on the Responsible Tourism Partnership website, and the link is at the end of this presentation. It's important to remember that tourism is a social construct. It's not a law of nature. Tourism has been around for a very long time, certainly for centuries, possibly for millennia. But it is something which we create as human beings by the way that we behave. So tourism is what we make it as consumers and producers. Given that that's the case, we can change it. And as Krippendorf says, every individual tourist builds up or destroys human values while they're travelling. He calls, and I particularly like this, he calls for rebellious tourists and rebellious locals. And of course, with recent campaigns about over-tourism, we've seen very much the rebellious locals. The rebellious tourists, in Krippendorf's view, would come because as people became wealthier, they would move up Maslow's hierarchy of needs and be more interested in self-realization. They would expect more of their holidays, and they would expect to have more powerful experiences. But that's part of what's driving the change towards responsible tourism. The point Krippendorf makes is that orders and prohibitions will not do the job, because it's not a bad conscience that we need to make progress, but rather positive experience. And this is the crunch. Not the feeling of compulsion, but that of responsibility. To travel responsibly is to have a better experience. Businesses and destinations choice edit their destination. And we must remember that the destination is the place where a local community lives. Their predecessors and they themselves remake that place for every generation. So the businesses that operate in those places need to be mindful of the special characteristics of the place and the kinds of experiences which are on offer, and then seek to attract tourists who will, to some extent, fit in and appreciate what they're experiencing in the place. A really hard example, a very firm example of choice editing, is where a destination decides that it will no longer provide water in plastic bottles. There has to be an alternative, obviously, but if you don't provide water in plastic bottles, then the tourists can't purchase water in plastic bottles and they can't dispose of their plastic bottles into the environment. But no one business can really do that on its own, because if there are still places that tourists can buy plastic bottles full of water, they will do that. So it has to be something done in a cooperative and collaborative way at the destination level. Now, if you look at the 2022 Charter on Responsible Tourism, it's absolutely clear that no business could do all of those things. There are a number of issues which are of global significance. The most obvious is greenhouse gas emissions. But plastic waste gets into watercourses, ends up in gyros of plastic waste in the oceans, and then gets into our food chain. That is also a major crisis, as is the biodiversity extinctions, which are happening all around the world. These are global issues requiring local action. You need to address those issues as best you can. But you also need to ask yourself, what are the issues which are locally where you operate? Talk with the local communities. What are the problems that you might be able to assist in helping? So there are hotels which provide potable water for local communities. It's also possible to purchase locally. It's possible to put money back into conserving local cultural and natural heritage. When you've decided what you're going to use your tourism business to do, explain to the customers, your suppliers and other businesses why you've chosen to take responsibility. And then set goals, measure your achievements and report the impact of your efforts. You need to get the credit. And to get the credit, you need to report your progress. Now, Porter is most famous. He's a Harvard economist. Nearly everybody who's done a master's in business administration, an MBA, will have come across Porter. He's most famous for his work on cluster theory, which is the point that for a business to thrive, it needs to have access to markets. We all know that. But also the business needs to have suppliers. It has a supply chain and it needs labour. And his argument is that businesses thrive best when there's a cluster of economic activity around the business. In the mid-2000s, he began to talk about creating shared value. And shared value is where the business changes the way it does its business to benefit the community around it and to help to build that cluster of economic activity, that cluster of increasingly skilled workers, that cluster of local production, which in tourism terms not only supports the business, but it also creates a richer destination for the tourist to visit. After all, tourists don't travel to see the hotel. They enjoy the hotel and the accommodation are an important part of the holiday experience, but it's not the main motivation to travel. There may be a few hotels in the world which can attract visitors on that basis, but most people are traveling to a destination to experience the place. They then look for somewhere to stay. So the competition for an accommodation unit is not the accommodation in the destination. It's all the other places in the world that those tourists could choose to go to. So if you follow Porter's cluster theory and his commitment to creating shared value, then the traditional approach of a top-down focus on foreign exchange earnings and volumes becomes much less relevant. What you're really looking for is a bottom-up approach, where you work with the community to create civic pride and to bring economic benefit through supplementary and alternative livelihoods, integrated rural development through employment and SMME, economic opportunities for local people to become engaged in selling either to tourism businesses, whether those are accommodations or operators, or by selling direct to the tourists. There are massive opportunities for local communities always around tourism. Now this fits with the increasing desire for experiential tourism. Tourists are increasingly looking for a really memorable experience, and this has been written about by Pine and Gilmore, again Harvard academics. They make the point that every business is a stage, that it should be seeking to entertain the consumers who are looking for these memorable experiences, and that means engaging in the culture and the community and the environment. After all, those memories which are created are a shared product of the host and the guest. It's the interactions very often with the local community, their environment and their culture, which creates those memorable experiences. The memories are co-created. The community plays an important part in that. And of course, from the business perspective, those co-created memories, those stories that people tell when they get home, the enthusiasm with which they talk about a place really drives business back to that place. And the best business, the cheapest business to attract is the business that comes from personal recommendations, from repeats and referrals. That's the gold dust of tourism. Now, Justin Francis, with whom I set up responsibletravel.com back in 2001, he made the point in the classroom when we were discussing this point that the difference is that if you take fairly traded coffee, unless you're a real connoisseur, it's very, very difficult to taste the difference. But with experiential tourism, you can taste the difference because it's there inherent in the product. What Justin says is that people find his site because they're looking for an experience. They come back because they know it's going to be a better experience because it's been developed in a responsible way. And that's the kind of repeat business that has grown his business very rapidly and which your businesses could benefit from. So we're moving from an industry, consumers concerned primarily with value for money, to a consumer interested far more in experience for money. Trips are getting shorter, but average daily spend is increasing as people spend more money on experiences in destinations. And the problem, I think, for Eswatini is to bring to the attention of the potential markets the wide range of wonderful experiences which are possible here in Eswatini. The difficulty is that those experiences are often little known outside of Eswatini, and sometimes not in even within Eswatini. I've never doubted the richness of the potential tourist and visitor experiences which can be accessed here in Eswatini. So just to return briefly to Porter and Kramer, they make three important points, I think. The first is that when we reconceive the products and the markets, when we begin to meet social needs, the needs of our communities which exist around the tourism industry and destinations, we're better able to serve existing markets, we can access new ones, we can lower costs through innovation and local supply. The second point they make is that we can redefine productivity within a value chain. We can improve quality, quantity, the cost, and very importantly for the tourism industry, the reliability of supply and the importance of stewarding the essential natural resources, the natural environment around us on which so much tourism depends. The third point they make is that by enabling local cluster development, businesses are able to compete and thrive with reliable local suppliers, good functioning infrastructure like roads and the internet, and of course fostering and growing local talent so that there is a highly skilled and increasingly skilled labour force available to the tourism industry in the destination. So what they're talking about is creating competitive advantage from building a social value proposition. This is not about charity. This is not the old version of CSR, corporate social responsibility, where you simply gave away money at the end of the year from the profits. This is a completely different approach of using business to create social value to benefit the business. So much more business-driven approach to the challenge of making tourism responsible. Now, we launched just last week, the ICRT Southern African Network. And I hope that people in Eswatini will become a part of this. These are networks. They don't have members, and most don't have bank accounts. It's a network of people who want to share ideas, ask questions of each other, learn from the practices of others, and to create partnerships for change. Most of the networks are involved in the Responsible Tourism Awards, and don't forget that the Africa Awards will be launched again next year. They've just been, the awards have just been made at WTM Africa. The awards for next year will be launched in November. You should think about whether you have things in practices and businesses and destinations in Eswatini who might benefit from winning an award. Most of the networks have university links based around sharing really useful knowledge. But at the heart of it, for me, is the creation of South-South exchange, both within the regions of the world, but also between them. So Adam Abbar there in the bottom right of this slide has been to India, I think, 3 times. And he's contributed a lot of his knowledge about how to make responsible tourism work, knowledge gained in the Gambia, to the development of responsible tourism in Kerala. Rupesh Kumar on the left, who Adam has worked with in India, has never been outside of India. He's been to World Travel Market, but he's never had the experience of working alongside Adama or anyone else in that situation of working with communities to develop tourism. What I want to do is to try to create the funding to enable South-South exchange so that people like Rupesh can visit Adam Abbar in the field and spend 2 or 3 weeks working with him and learning about the approaches, strategies and methodologies that Adam uses in the Gambia and vice versa. We need to begin to share best practices so that not everything has to be reinvented every time somebody sets out to develop responsible tourism with the community in the destination. So it's about learning from experience and sharing experience between practitioners. Now this is Adam Abbar's project from the Gambia. I wasn't involved with it at all. It's a Gambia is Good project which he conceptualized and developed. He was working with over 1,000 Gambian producers, 90% of whom were women, in farmer cooperatives, developing a continuity of supply and a reliability of supply, which meant that the small local farmers were able to sell into the hotels and the resorts. That's not a simple thing to do. It's complicated to create the continuity of supply, to grow the range of fruit and vegetables that the hotels need. But it has a national benefit because it reduces the imports and increases consumption and the economic value of locally grown produce, which benefits both local farmers and the environment. Now let's go to India. This is Village Ways, a company which is Indian based and which provides experiences of village life to European and Indian tourists who want to go and enjoy the countryside, walking through it, not trekking. This is on the edge of the Himalayas. It's in the foothills of the Himalaya, but it's not about trekking. It's about walking through that countryside, meeting and talking with people, as they say here on their website, experiencing the rhythms of village life and making meaningful connections. Now, you may notice that there are some similarities between this landscape and the landscape in Eswatini. Eswatini, in my view, would be very suited to this kind of walking experience. You can see where it's being done. It's being done right up in the foothills of the Himalaya. And you can see the interaction there between the host and the guests around traditional hospitality. So people are walking from one village to another and enjoying that experience of communicating, having a meaningful connection with local people and learning about their way of life and the way they farm and about their culture. One of the reasons that Village Ways was set up was to try to stem the outward migration of young people from the villages into the cities. And it's been very successful at doing that. As you can see from the slide, it's also been very successful. This is consumer comment on the experiences that they've had. So it's worked both for the communities and for the villages, and very importantly, it's kept the youth in the villages rather than them all leaving to the cities. So now let's come to Kerala. Now, the first international conference on responsible tourism in destinations was held in Cape Town in 2002. The one today is the 17th. But the second was held in 2008 in Kerala. And I was asked to help Kerala by bringing the conference to their state. And my brief was to try to bring examples of responsible tourism from all around the world. There's a lot more experience now than there was then, but there was already quite a lot of experience. And they picked up 3 key pillars of what needed to be done. The first was the idea, which came from the Gambia, of creating the producer groups, so that villages would be able to supply fruit and vegetables to the resorts and hotels, so that the communities would be benefiting from tourism. But those producer groups now also produce craft, soft furnishings and so on for hotels when they're refurbished. So there are now producer groups which are, if you like, craft orientated and soft furnishings for hotels and resorts, and also producing fruit and vegetables and fish into the resorts. The second idea that they picked up came from the township tours in South Africa. And they've turned them into village life experiences, where the experience is to go with a local guide to a village and meet probably with 5 or 6 households who are involved in various forms of economic activity, and we'll look at some of those in a minute. They get paid for your visit. You get the experience of talking with and often practicing some of the agricultural and craft practices that they use. And these tours are commissionable. So when a tour operator sells a village life experience, they make a percentage. When the resort or hotel owner sells one of these village life experiences, they too make a percentage. So it's been fully integrated into the tourism industry. Critically, you want to avoid dependency. So here's an example of a tourist watching a religious image being created using mostly seeds and sunflower petals. I've done that. It's the most amazing experience to enjoy. This is also something I've done. This is turning coir, the husk around the coconut, into rope. And I made a piece of rope in just that way. It's a treasured possession. It sits on the windowsill in my bedroom, and it reminds me of my experience of Kerala. It's a souvenir which I was actually made myself with women in exactly this way in Kerala. Which brings us perhaps now to Africa. This is Klaus Lodge up in the Kalahari. And what they see themselves as doing is partnering with communities to commercialise their tourism assets. And the tourism assets are really of 2 kinds. It's obviously the lodges built for the communities by the South African government as part of the land restitution initiatives, but it's also about commercialising the experiences which are available around the lodges. So that's a group going with a local guide on an early morning walk from Klaus Lodge in the Kalahari. Now, one of the things they've done at Wittishoek, for example, is to purchase the furniture from a local carpenter. So they brought the examples of the furniture from Cape Town and then invited the local carpenter to replicate those furnishings. And all of the furniture at Wittishoek Mountain Lodge has been made by a local carpenter. That makes a dramatic difference to the local economy. Similarly, buying fruit and vegetables from local farmers increases the economic value of tourism in the destination, but it also means that you've got fresh fruit for the guests to enjoy. So it's an improvement in the community's economic benefit from tourism, but it's also an enrichment of the tourist experience for the visitors and the tourists. You may want to just stop this video and have a closer look at this. But basically, this is a very simple way of working out what the local spend is in any lodge, and tour operators could do the same thing. What you have to do is create an additional column in your accounts, in your bookkeeping. Obviously, it's easy to measure the number of employees that you have, and also to work out the percentage of those who are people locally. So you can see here that 93% of the employees at Kais Lodge are local. And then you can look at the local procurement, things which are produced locally. They are goods of local origin, and you can sum the total of money you spent on that. And then local supply, things which have been purchased locally but which may not have been made locally. There obviously the benefit is smaller because it's only going to be the retail margin. On the local origin, all of the value goes to the local producer, stays and recirculates in the local economy. Then you can look at the total community benefit in terms of staff remuneration and the other benefits. You can look at the rental fee that TFPD pays to the local community, and then you can look at the reinvestment, the upgrading of the resort, then conservation income, and then you can total the amounts of money spent in the region. So you can fairly easily work out the local economic benefit of tourism into a local community where you're trying to use shared value to bring local development. This is the same process for Wittishoek Mountain Lodge in the Drakensberg. Now what's interesting, if you look at the bottom right there, is the graph, and the green shows the benefit of the asset upgrade. And you can see there the local spending which results from the asset upgrade. So you get this much bigger local spend in the refit, and then you see the refurbishment line running on. But obviously the major benefit at Wittishoek there is the staff remuneration and benefits. But the rental is significant as well. So now to Bwindi. This is at the Bwindi Impenetrable Forest. It's a gorilla reservation area. The local community was moved out when the area was gazetted, and we were asked to do some work in the buffer zone to try and increase the benefits to going to local communities from tourism in that area. And where we got to with this was that the women had basket making skills, but they weren't really able to sell the baskets very easily, and certainly not for a very high price. So we found a local artist with basket making skills based in Kampala. We paid him to train some local women to both improve the strength and the durability and the look of the baskets. But we also asked him to suggest some new designs, and he came up with these landscape colours, which really do, even now, speak to me of the landscapes of Bwindi. And it's become a very successful now. The training has paid off. You can see here the quote to Peter. Hi Peter, sorry to ask this, but kindly help me with some kind of advice. We're selling the new baskets at $10, but due to the high demand from clients, we want to sell them at 20. Peter obviously said, please go ahead and sell at 20 and possibly higher. So by selling the baskets at a much higher price, the women were taking a bit longer to make the higher quality baskets, but they were selling at a higher price, and their hourly rate of pay doubled as a result of this, which was great news for them. The other thing that we did was to get to set up these very simple display cases to put into the lodges, and that again increased the sales of the baskets. We've come across while we've been here that it's an international trade centre project working with the local community in Eswatini, and here around Pigs Peak they've been working on developing further the weaving skills to create a bigger variety and higher value products, again to increase the incomes of the women who do that kind of work. Now, I'm often asked about the market. In my view, the most reliable evidence comes from the Booking.com surveys that are done every year. You can find a number of links to them over the years on the Responsible Tourism Partnership website. You can see here 74% of respondents from, I think, more than 10 countries where the survey is done. 30,000 is the sample size. 74% want travel companies to offer more sustainable choices. That's up from 66% in 2022. 51% believe that there are not enough sustainable travel options. And tourists struggle to find these experiences. They're still not really being sold by the tour operators. There's a massive market opportunity here. 75% of travellers say that they're looking for authentic experiences which represent the local community. Now, you may well say these are just aspirations, but you take those aspirations done by the same kinds of surveys in the same way. You take them very seriously when you ask whether people want to come to Eswatini or not. So there's no reason to take that research seriously and to ignore the opportunity here to be providing much more information about the sustainability of your product, but also the richness of the experiences which are available. So this is about, the whole responsible tourism approach is about using tourism to make better places to live in, using tourism to achieve sustainable development. The real aspiration of responsible tourism is to use tourism rather than to be used by it. You really want to use tourism to benefit your communities and your place, rather than to be simply used by it, as you are in Eswatini by those groups who just come in through a gate in the morning. They maybe stop at a viewpoint and some craft stall at the side of the road, but they leave that evening having spent very little in Eswatini. A saying that you hear a lot when you go further east than India is that tourism is like a fire. You can use it to cook your food, or it can burn your house down. And really managing tourism is fundamentally important. But the aspiration should be to use tourism rather than to be used by it. So think about it. If you're a business, you've got an enhanced product and experience. You've got the loyalty advantage that people will want to travel with you again if you're offering these kinds of much better experiences. It gives you differentiation in a crowded marketplace. It's non-price competition. So you're competing on the quality of your offer rather than just on your price. It enables you to segment the market and work out exactly where you want to target your market rather than address the whole of the population of your source market. It gives added relevance for particular products. We all want guilt-free holidays and we all want better experiences. The commercial reasons for doing this are obvious. So I want just briefly to talk about a Tanzania coffee farm visit, which I was asked to evaluate. I wish I'd done it, but I didn't. This is interesting because this was developed to a coffee cooperative as a supplementary livelihood because it was critically important to avoid dependency. So none of the farmers had this for more than a few weeks each year, and it was shared around so that many different coffee farmers benefited. This is for a group of tourists who come off the plane. They're flown overnight from Amsterdam. They get off the plane, they go to visit a local farmer where they're split into several groups. And there were two purposes. One was to increase the income of the farmers, and the other was to increase their pride in the farms. So you develop the international tour operation, and then this is the gem. They didn't start training the farmers to cope with the arriving tourists until 2 weeks before the first group of tourists arrived. So it was done in a very efficient way. And you can see here as in one small group with the coffee farmer having an explanation of that one particular coffee tree. And he took us around each of the coffee trees, talking about how he had fostered and grown that coffee tree. And coffee trees are not easy to grow. Now we're back at the farm, and the coffee beans are being ground or rather dehusked, sorry, they're being dehusked in this machine. But by now people are talking with the farmer about his children, about schooling, about football. They're beginning to have a full-on conversation with somebody from the community. It really enriches the experience. Now here's a relatively elderly lady. She got her hands on the pestle and mortar where the coffee is ground, and she wasn't going to let anybody else have a go. She was enjoying it so much. Similarly, this young man baking the coffee beans over a wood fire, he wasn't going to share that either with anybody else. But these are immensely valuable experience for the tourists. The coffee was terrible, by the way, almost undrinkable. But the point was they'd gone through the whole process of picking it, processing it in a rather crude way, and without the skills of a proper coffee producer. But the joy, you can see the joy on his face, the sheer joy that the tourists got from that. And of course, the earnings for the farmers who earned more with that experience than they would probably earn in about a month of traditional coffee farming. Which brings us to Ngwenya Glass here in Eswatini. Ngwenya Glass won the Global Award for Best for Sourcing Craft and Food in the Global Responsible Tourism Awards last year. And if you go to that website, you'll be able to see a little video about Ngwenya Glass. They are a stunning example of a business which has chosen to create a cluster of tourism development around the business. So on the on the left there, you can see the factory. There are some shops there for local crafters. On the right, a further group of shops, some of which are for one crafter, others are for a group of crafters working together. But what this has done is give local crafters, local SMMEs, the opportunity to sell to international tourists because Ngwenya Glass has created a cluster attraction to benefit both their own business, of course, but also to benefit other SMME businesses who benefit from the market access that Ngwenya Glass provides. You can see here the quality of the products that are on sale. Really remarkably high quality craft products for sale there and accessible to tourists. This is papier-mâché, which used to be big when I was a child in the UK. It's largely gone out. But this is all products made from papier-mâché, including the counter. Remarkable. Fairly traded, policed by the group. They talk about the Fair Trade Angel, but that helps with the marketing as well. And yet another shop selling craft and clothing and so on at Ngwenya Glass. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed that presentation. I think the opportunities in in Eswatini for cluster development through tourism are very large, and you can see there the links to my Responsible Tourism Partnership website, where there's a lot more information available. It's available in over 20 languages now, and I hope you'll find things there which are of use to you. Thank you for listening.